Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you to all that have joined us from across Africa and even beyond. We also acknowledge those that have joined us on Facebook Live. My name is Velenasi Munsanje, and I work as the Media Center Manager at Zambia's International School of Lusaka. This webinar is brought to you by the African Library and Information Associations and Institutions, AFLIA. So this webinar today is the third and last of a three-part series looking at open science and libraries. The first webinar in the series looked at what open science is, and the second looked at institutional and national repositories in Africa and possibilities of centralized data repositories in Africa. And today, in this last webinar in the series, we will be looking at research data management, practices, and present challenges. As you may be aware, making knowledge available and accessible is a major criterion for finding innovative solutions for the crisis the world is currently going through. The aim of open science movement is to make scientific research at all levels and formats available to everyone so that learning, research, creation of additional knowledge, collaborations, and innovations can take place. This has become critical as scientific research is becoming more and more data-driven, and the need to share data and knowledge in order to curb wasteful duplication and scale discoveries and economies continues to increase. Africa's need for open science goes beyond finding solutions for the COVID-19 pandemic and assisting people to navigate the new normal successfully. The developmental challenges in the continent are actually escalating. Open science will enable sharing of knowledge on how to solve these challenges that are holding the continent back. This is crucial for the growth of the motherland. AFLIA, your trusted voice for African librarians and libraries, believes that African libraries have huge roles to play as they fit in clearly as major advocates in making knowledge open, available, and accessible to all. That is the reason this series of webinars have been arranged to widen the understanding of African librarians on open science movement and to equip these professionals to be in the forefront of advocating and leading the practice for openness of knowledge across the entire continent. It is therefore very important that librarians understand how to manage research data, hence this webinar. Please kindly note that the webinar materials will be shared after the webinar on our various AFLIA platforms, and the recording will also be uploaded to the AFLIA YouTube channel. And all attendees are kindly requested to use the question and answer feature to ask the questions that they have for the presenter. I would now like to introduce today's presenter, who has been with us for the other two webinars in this series. And this is Valerie Robillard. And we are privileged that Emerald Publishing, one of the world's leading independent digital-first scholarly publishing house, has been gracious enough to provide this seasoned research person. Valerie is currently working as a senior publisher in the open research team at Emerald. She assists with the strategic development of the Emerald Publishing Service, working with partner organizations and editors around the world to publish and develop their open access journals. She also supports open access initiatives implemented by Emerald. Valerie holds a master's degree in international business and foreign languages from the University of Angers in France and a Bachelor of Arts Honors in European Studies from the University of Hull in UK. Valerie, you are welcome, and over to you.
Let me start my video. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Velenasi. That's very kind. So good evening and good afternoon, you all. Hope you're well and safe. I hope you can actually hear me well as well. So it's my pleasure to present this last webinar which was part of a series around open science. So this webinar will focus in particular on research data management practices and challenges. So before I start on that, I would like to thank AFLIA for organizing this series of webinars, allowing us, particularly publishers, to connect with librarians on the importance of open science, including open data and open access, and how you can start engaging within your institution to think, to discuss, and really implement data management practices and open science initiatives. So I've got my video on, but I will switch it off during the presentation. So just to mitigate any connection issues, I'll have it back on when we come to the question and answer sessions at the end of the presentation. Thank you in advance for listening in. Okay, so I'll move on to full screen mode. So the agenda today is what is research data management, or RDM. So what are the opportunities and challenging around implementing research data management practices from your perspective as librarian? How can you implement RDM practices again? And I think just to give you a bit of context and hopefully give you, I think, better thinking, I've actually found a really interesting case studies on the library at the University of Dodoma in Tanzania. So I'm not sure if we have any participants from this library. I think it'd be great to hear from these colleagues at the end of the sessions if they wanted to add anything. And then finally, I will go through resources I've actually found to put together that webinar, which I would like to encourage you to read. Okay. So what is research data management, or RDM? So as we previously discussed it, so libraries and librarians can play a significant part in the development of open science, and several roles and measures have been identified for the different facets of open science. This includes open access, open data, open educational resources, etc. However, there is no doubt that currently the focus is primarily on the data element and its management. So let's start by defining what is research data management, or RDM. So research data management refers to the storage, access, and preservation of data produced from a given investigation. Data management practices cover the entire life cycle of the data, from planning the investigation to conducting it, and from backing up data as it's created and used to long-term preservation deliverables after the research investigation has concluded. So as well as this data curation, the further aim of RDM services is really to ensure research integrity and enable the use of existing data for future research endeavors. Okay. Really, RDM services have been established in response to increased research outputs and being both supported by the existence of appropriate online infrastructures and data sharing mandates by funding agencies and researchers who are committed to open science, which advocates for open verification and reproduction of research data. Just to give you an example of funding agency, so in South Africa, the National Research Foundation, or NIF, has released a statement on open access for data retention, mandating that the funded research publications and supporting data be deposited in an accredited open access repository with the provision of DOI, Digital Object Identifier, for future citation and referencing. So these requirements certainly change the face of research and drive data curation services in all academic and research institutions benefiting from NI funding. Let's have a look at data lifecycle models. So data, why am I inputting that really? Why am I including that in my presentation? So these models, data lifecycle models, have been used previously by university librarians to identify opportunities available to library services to encourage responsible sharing of data. So on that slide, I've just put the example of model from the UK Data Service that describes pretty well the whole life cycle of data. I won't go through it in detail, but it includes the creation and processing of data, analyzing data, preserving it, giving access, and reusing the data. So the questions you should be asking is in which areas can you get involved as a librarian? Where do opportunities lie to implement RDM services relevant to your institutions? Okay. So talking about opportunities, I've listed here a few, which are for librarians, so categorized across different elements that encourage responsible data sharing. So this is availability, findability, interpretability, reusability, citability, and curation preservation. So each element describes opportunities that librarians can embrace in order to, and will, as such, will implement research data management practices. That's what they are. So I will just highlight a few here. So how can you help make the data available to start with? By lowering barriers to researchers to make their data available. That's a lot through the framework of guidance, tools, and infrastructure. How can you support discoverability of data? For instance, by encouraging the use of persistent identifiers such as DOIs, and setting up relevant and common metadata policies and citation practices. How can you support the interpretability of data? By encouraging researchers to link their papers with their data sets. How can you support the reusability of data by curating and preserving data sets, often through an institutional repository and guidance on preparing data sets so that they can be shared as widely as possible? How can you support the citability of data? By guiding researchers to cite data sets following a uniform format. And how can you help or contribute to the curation and preservation of data through the promotion of good data management practice and best practices during data creation? So I can understand so that this sounds a little bit general and actually lack a little bit of detail and examples, tangible examples. So I've actually, towards that end of the webinar, I'm using a case based on RDM work that the University of Dodoma in Tanzania has implemented. And that will definitely help illustrate these opportunities I've just laid down and illustrate and then clarify to you as well how you can get started with the implementation of RDM services and practices. Obviously, there are challenges to the implementation of RDM practices, which are very similar to the challenges we've discussed over the past couple of weeks with regards to open science and institutional repositories. I'm going to highlight here a couple of challenges which are key to the African continent, and again will resonate to you. So the first one is the availability of resources and infrastructure. I mean, it's true that unfortunately university libraries face limited resources and infrastructure. It's a fact. However, I'm going to give you an example of one university that has responded well to this challenge. This is the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, or CPUT, sorry. An example I will be using on this slide in particular. So the approach at CPUT libraries has actually been to work collaboratively with other universities internationally to develop an open source platform by engaging researchers about their requirements. So the software infrastructure being developed was open source, free for reuse by other interested libraries globally. The development process was collaborative in nature with researchers, librarians, and IT experts providing input to develop software platforms and services to support RDM services. So each international institution involved was in control of its own environment, and only the development of the platform, the exchange of ideas through working committees and groups, relevant skills transfer and problem solving are shared. In a nutshell, don't feel that you're on your own or your institution is actually on your own. Share ideas, discuss with your peers from other libraries that have already implemented research data management practices. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, you shouldn't, because you should build common standards and you will save time and resources, as we will see from the case studies. Okay. As such, so that university has managed to overcome another big challenge that has been highlighted in the literature, and that's the limited skill set of librarians, as well as the lack of understanding of the diversity of research data itself within the context of different disciplinary cultures and varying data practices. So it's been suggested that to overcome the challenges of skill set in RDM, the best approach is to reassign the existing staff to new roles with appropriate training. Other challenges that libraries face in staffing RDM activities include how to balance existing roles with new RDM roles, the lack of understanding by librarians of the motives and practices of researchers and the diversity of research data, the lack of domain-specific knowledge, using current experiences for creation of research data context, and the problem of engaging researchers who view librarians' role as that of supporting teaching. However, regardless of these views and challenges, it is the responsibility of the librarians to change perceptions and convince researchers that they can undertake the role. At CPUT libraries, a special skills development plan had been established for a 3-year period to enable librarians, and especially subject librarians, participation in RDM. The library had also started creating new rules dedicated specifically to managing and developing RDM practices. One such position within CPUT libraries was the position of an e-research systems developer, who was or who is responsible for developing all the systems and tools for RDM services. Upskilling librarian staff there was supported by a training program run both by internal staff and external service provider, depending on the skills to be offered. Joint international training workshops through the partnership with international institutions had also been held to further familiarize staff and build capacity in understanding approaches in RDM services. It's worth noting that in South Africa, also some library and information science schools have started to recognize the need for skills in this area and are beginning to offer a number of programs dedicated to data management and curation. So there's a solution to this, a solutions that I think each institution will be able to adapt to, again by talking to one another how they've actually overcome that challenge of upskilling staff. Okay. It's really important that the institution has equipped itself with appropriate skill sets around to implement relevant and responsible research data management practices. Another challenge to note as well, although I've not put it into that slide, is the absence of national government mandates on data management, which has often held back development and implementation of RDM services. Similarly, research funding agencies are not yet applying sufficient pressure to ensure that Africa complies with the requirement to deposit research data in trusted repositories. So let's talk a little bit about how to implement RDM practices, how to get started. So first, I think what is obviously really important is that you, as the institution, you will need to develop RDM in the context of your university's culture and environment. Institutions ought to conduct a requirements or needs analysis that will determine how good RDM fits into the existing research practices, what services should be offered, and what resources related to research data are required. It is apparent that gathering the views of an institution's research stakeholders, that include researchers, librarians, IT teams, and administrators, should and will certainly facilitate the identification of their immediate needs, and that an analysis of these needs would lay the foundation of effective RDM service. One can save time and some efforts by reviewing again what standard RDM activities other similar institutions have already identified and carried out, which will also help develop some level of common RDM components across institutions and regions. Second, it is then important to develop an institutional strategy and policy towards establish a sustainable and achievable RDM service. The strategy has to show an understanding of the current position and provide a definition of the desired future position. So what's the position of the institution now in terms of RDM? What are the opportunities you can get involved? Where do you want to get to? And do gap analysis. Okay. The strategy should stipulate your objectives, surface the set of planned activities, and provide a roadmap for the implementation of the initiatives over a set period of time. Developing the strategy and the set of targets largely depends on an analysis of the environmental factors and internal expressed needs, as I said before. So extensive consultations are essential when you develop institutional RDM policy. It's important to acknowledge the roles and responsibilities that different stakeholders play, and to meet as many as is possible of the needs and requirements of all the stakeholders. This is an important step towards ensuring widespread buying and adoption of the policy. Okay. Finally, a clearly stated policy facilitates ease of use by all the various stakeholders. The policy should address 3 things, or at least 4 things: data management planning, the management of active data, the selection of data for long-term preservation and the accessibility of data through the use of catalogs and repositories. Data management planning is the backbone of data management practices, even without any supporting policies from government or research funding agencies. Despite variations in funder-specific requirements, many require data management plans when a research proposal has been submitted. So when I say many, I mean researchers. The plan, or DMP, data management plan, should present basic information on how the researchers will collect data and how data will be shared and preserved, including any restrictions that may apply. The data management plan, when shared, also allows all the stakeholders to plan and ensure that the necessary infrastructure is in place when the research is initiated. This is one thing that each institution should at least provide. I've mentioned the management of active data. Facilitating data management services involves supporting data management during the active stage of research. It requires flexibility and functionality that allow researchers to store, access, and share their data during research, especially when they collaborate with others overseas. Studying existing data storage practices in the institution, such as how much data is produced, where is the data stored, and what backup facilities are in place, provide a stepping stone to address problems associated with managing active data. Preserving selected data. Data that have long-term value should be preserved and made available for reuse in future research activities. Data ought to be selected based on the value they have to the institution and the general public. Criteria for the selection of data with long-term value should be set by the institution, especially data that align with the institution's mission, non-replicable data, unique data, and data with historical value are important to the organization. Deposit agreements should be put in place before data is ingested, and the importance of these agreements should be emphasized through advocacy and proper guidance by the institution. Finally, we talk about accessibility of data via catalogs or better institutional repositories. So managing data for long-term preservation, facilitating access and reuse we need the creation of a proper record of all available research data sets. The data sets could be made openly accessible to allow discoverability and reuse of research data, but this is not a prerequisite for a catalogue. When data is not openly available, the organization should consider making the metadata available. When data is made accessible, it is recommended that persistent identifiers, such as DOIs, as we've seen, are used to ensure that the metadata, as well as the research data, will remain accessible for reuse. Okay. Finally, the implementation of these RDM practices will be enhanced, facilitated through the active involvement of university libraries from the early stages of established RDM. I'm not saying that librarians should act on their own. As we said before, there should be a wider group involved. The libraries can help and support by conducting the needs assessment of the academic research community that I had mentioned at the start, by participating in the creation of an RDM policy that includes both funders and institutional requirements, advocacy, creating awareness, providing support through training and consultation services, developing data repositories, and creating metadata for research data. Librarians are assisting researchers in creating data management plans and guiding them to align their plans with institutional and funder data policies requirements. Lastly, librarians have a role to play in facilitating the discovery and dissemination of the metadata for datasets held by the institution. RDM, as I said, is a team effort. Research stakeholders, namely researchers, funding agencies, libraries, and research management, all have roles to play towards effective RDM services. The level of contribution from each of the stakeholders may vary, obviously, from one institution to another, based on the approach used to support research. Now, I think to make it really more pertinent and just to see what tangible actions some universities have actually taken to implement RDM services or practices, I'd like to use a case studies from the library at the University of Dodoma in Tanzania. So I found this paper very useful to read. I've actually put it into the resources in the last slide. I'm really inviting you to read it. This is very insightful, very engaging. So I thank the authors in advance for their contribution. So the University of Dodoma in Tanzania have recently implemented research data management practices. The way they did it is they did it in 4 phases, which are described on this slide. So where necessary, so these phases could overlap because of different stakeholders driving the phase. Implementation was deliberately planned like this to allow the library to continue with activities before the policy was formally accepted. So phase 1 was about the strategy, policy, procedures, and infrastructure. So this really critical phase lays down the foundation and research data management infrastructure in the context of the university through developing an RDM policy and strategic plans for sustainable RDM services. A comprehensive RDM policy should clearly again identify the responsibilities of each stakeholder and ensure that the project is seen as part of normal university activities. RDM involves different departments, which include library services, the ICT department, the research office, researchers themselves, as well as executive management. Each of these stakeholders has each role must be clearly stated in the policy to ensure active participation and ultimately also project success. For this to be successful, all stakeholders have been invited to participate in planning the policy. This phase also involves the actual implementation of RDM infrastructure, such as data storage, data repositories, and developing important tools such as data management planning tool. For the library, this phase requires guiding, training, and supporting different stakeholders in performing their responsibilities. The library is expecting to participate, but not to lead activities linked to this phase. Okay. The identified phase 2 was about awareness creation, skills development, and repository content development. So the initial needs assessment indicated that the University of Dodoma researchers and stakeholders have a low level of awareness of RDM practices. Therefore, concerted effort is required to create awareness regarding the benefits of good RDM practices. Both researchers and university research management stakeholders need to be made aware of various issues related to RDM, such as funder mandates, accessing and sharing data, infrastructure requirements, and support available at the university library. It is vital that the library ensures skill development for both librarians and there are very many online training modules available to initiate the activity. But at some stage, the library will need to also customize the training offering to make provision for the context and adapted requirements of the University of Dodoma specifically. Some of the methods of creating awareness and promoting RDM practices included publishing articles via the university and library websites, symposiums, introducing the matter at the important institutional meetings, and through training and workshops. This phase requires leadership and project management from the library. The library could expect participation from other stakeholders, but these activities could be regarded as the library's responsibility. Phase 3, as we've seen before, is the management of active data. The focus is to manage active data, which involves developing services to facilitate data management during the active stage of research, as I've already told. When the initial assessment was conducted at the University of Dodoma, it was established that 75% of school staff researchers used personal computers and laptops to store their data. USB drives, external hard drives, CDs and DVDs. Only a small percentage was using cloud storage such as Dropbox, Google Drive and OneDrive to store their research data. None of the respondents indicated the use of managed data or central storage of research data. So this phase, therefore, includes ensuring sufficient data storage capacity that will enable researchers to store, access, and share their research data during collaboration. It does also require that researchers are made aware of storage facilities in the cloud that are more reliable. The library is expecting to participate, but not to lead activities linked to this phase. This was, again, the case of that university. Phase 4 included data selection and preservation. This phase addresses issues related to identifying those data sets that are irreplaceable data with high value. The development of data selection criteria is core to this phase because it will not be possible to retain all data. Similarly, deposit agreements, deposit tools, and the development of guidance documentation also need attention. This phase requires leadership and project management from the library, but it is anticipated that the phase will not be initiated before phases 1 and 2 are well understood and required outputs are in place. On the other hand, the library could expect participation from other stakeholders, but these activities could be regarded as the library's responsibilities. If the library still has by then not developed the necessary skills to do so, knowledgeable experts would have to be contracted in to ensure that all valuable data sets are curated for the longer term. So this is the courses I'd like to invite you to read, and in particular the second and third bullet points are very good papers to read. They really give you a good insight on perspective from African universities, university libraries on applying research data management practices, where they find the challenges and how they actually overcome these challenges. The last bullet point, the Melbourne Policy Library, I think is a very good example of a well-completed and relevant policy for the university. So I'll invite you to read it. So I hope this webinar, that's the end of that webinar. I hope that this has enlightened you to start thinking about RDM and make the initial steps towards the implementation of another RDM policy framework, but obviously not on your own. Just to finally, just to say a few words, I truly believe that African research needs opportunities offered through open science. It needs to embrace these opportunities that are facilitated some way, somehow by national and institutional policies. But there needs to be stronger work around these policies. There needs to be stronger involvement. I'm really inviting you to get involved for the good of research and more widely for the good of society. So thank you for listening and thank you for your engagement.
Thank you very much, Valerie, for the wonderful presentation. I, for one, has learned a lot on what we can do as librarians in order to manage data. So we have a few questions that people that are following have asked. The first one says, is there a discussion group or listserv of universities in Africa that already implemented research data management, or those that are planning to? Or is there such a group outside Africa?
Yes, there's obviously the international, there's LIBA, the Association of the International Library, and I'm not sure if I've actually put the resource, but has discussion forum and specific discussion forums on different open science areas, including RDM practices. So I invite you to actually check their websites and to sign up as a member if you can. I will obviously invite you to connect with AFLIA. AFLIA will be your first point of contact where you can actually, hopefully, I'm not sure if there's a discussion forum, but create a discussion forum towards the implementation of RDM practices and towards actually the, more active involvement in open science.
Okay, great. And then somebody is asking, is there a standard on what to be included when you create the research data management repository?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there a module that is readily available for the establishment of research data management?
Yes, so I think, like I said, so it's worth definitely looking at what institutions have already done, similar institutions to yours, particularly which are in the same country or in the same region as yours, to see what they've done in terms of RDM practices. It will save you a lot of time and efforts already. So having discussions around what their policy is and how they got started with RDM practices, depending obviously on their availability of resources and availability of budgets. But I believe you can already learn from that. Beyond that, I think you will need to carry out, again, quite a customized assessment of what your institution needs by doing some surveys, questionnaires to obviously ITs, researchers, and then libraries, and the kind of the management of the institutions to find out what the needs of the institutions are. I think to get started, it's worth having a look at what other universities have done. Like I said, just in terms of data management planning, so which is really the backbone of research data management practice, you can do a lot about guiding researchers on how to elaborate a research data management plan, which will be so essential so that data can actually be shared, be made available, and we'll be able to reuse it afterwards. Really, that's probably one thing you can start investigating.
Okay, great. And I think we have more than one person asking about infrastructure. What infrastructures must be put in place in order to manage research data?
Very much depends on again, how much you can do in terms of managing research data. I mean, what money you have available and what skills you have available, and again, what objectives you have for institutions. Once you have your objective set, what you should do is a gap analysis that will actually help identify it. So what activities and what plans you need to make to reach these objectives. So really define a roadmap to reach these objectives. And I would say, so that can be obviously a roadmap involving infrastructure, roadmap involving skills of librarians, roadmap involving, guidance, definitely guidance, and tools for supporting researchers.
Okay, great.
I mean, I would say, an infrastructure can differ from a basic catalog, data catalog, to an institutional repository. So again, this very much depends on the amount of money and resources, skills you have available and you want to invest in.
Okay, great. And what can a small library do to manage research data when such infrastructure is not in place? Is it possible?
I think the best to find out really is to talk and to ask the researchers of that you actually look after, the management you look after, what the UIT means are. So it's definitely is discussing the needs to find out how you can support these needs and how you can particularly probably develop their awareness of research data management, so that they while creating data, they keep in mind the fact that their data is precious and should be again stored and shared and reused as widely as possible. Obviously, very much depends. So what the librarian needs to know in that case is what kind of data are we talking about? What kind of data sets should be stored? So really is getting to know what active data, again, I mentioned, researchers are data sets researchers are actually using, what tools they're using, and so to respond better to their needs. It's a discussion that should be happening between you and the researchers.
All right, great, thank you. And somebody would like to find out what relationship exists between institutional repository policy and research development management policy.
Mm-hmm. So research management policy is slightly broader than institutional repository policies. So research management, data management policies would include that part of depositing, storing data on institutional repositories, which are themselves guided by different policies. So policies, around access, around deposits. So really policies that are unique to that repository. What the RDM will do, or around really institutional repositories, is encouraging users, researchers to have their information ready to be deposited to these institutional repositories or digital repositories, and is to give them a clue on what repositories they should be using. So it's, having an awareness of policies of institutional repositories. That will be elements of your data, research data management practices and policies.
All right.
Components.
So can an institution use its institutional repository for research data as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, research repositories should actually store data sets, but data set that each institution should agree to store. Data sets that are considered as unique and valuable for your institution. So it's not all data sets. And that's a discussion that should happen between yourself, the researchers, and the executive. Okay.
All right, great. And do we have any policies, laws, or ethics from AFLIA or other organizations that one can cite that can actually be used to drive open science policy in an institution?
I won't be able to, I think AFLA will be able to give comments to that particular question. I'm sure if you look at their resources online, you'll find some tools and framework to guide you. However, I would strongly suggest that also you get in touch personally, particularly if you want to get involved in shaping up policies. I think that will be really interesting, really insightful, and will obviously develop your skills as librarians and develop your networks, which I think is key, definitely, to embracing open science and making sure that actually more open science initiatives are being implemented across Africa.
All right. And somebody would like to know which method of data preservation, storage, and accessible is safer, secure, and more effective between the traditional model of filing and the e-services, which is the digital model. Which one is safer, secure, and more effective?
I think you'd have to look at e-services, of course. I think there's, for data preservation, You need to talk again to, I'm not, an expert in data preservation, sorry. As publisher, as working in a publishing house. So I'd invite you to connect with your peers to talk about, the most effective and particularly the safest platforms to use for data preservation and storage. So I can't give you a straight answer, unfortunately, but I'm sure some of your colleagues will be able to comment on that.
All right, great. And there's the aspect of training. Some people would like to know what opportunities are currently available for librarians to get training in research data management.
Okay, so what opportunities? So for data training, I think we've talked about, webinars occurring in, through, taking part in webinars, which are either facilitated by AFLA or other international associations, librarianship associations, getting involved in networking groups will be really important, and will help increase your knowledge and skills. Again, we mentioned that some university programs have started developed around the management of data. I think it's worth looking at that as well, but also looking at what your institution can offer you in terms of upskilling, I guess, or developing your skill. But it's I think with that example of was it CPUT, what they used is also the expertise from international libraries. So I think it's worth noting that if the universities you're actually working with as international partnerships, I would actually also encourage you to get in touch with these universities and particularly these librarians and find out about their skills and how you can actually share knowledge and develop your professional expertise around data.
Okay, great. So Valerie, just one thing, please do share your last slide.
Yes, sorry.
Any questions? Okay, all right. And somebody would like to find out what challenges we may find if libraries were to lead research development management projects in academic institutions, and how you could overcome such if libraries were to lead the research development management projects in academic institutions. What challenges are likely to be faced, and how would we overcome such?
Okay, so I think the challenges will be around probably ensuring that you have the buy-in from the stakeholders you should be talking to if you were leading such a group in your institution. So the challenge will to be make sure that you've been heard and listened to, and that you have the right expertise, that you have the dialogue, the words, the skills to communicate what the university needs, maybe, or could be, what the objectives of RDM practices the institution should implement, and how to achieve these practices. So the challenges will be around you making sure that you're very much confident in data management, and you're very much confident in communicating this to your stakeholders in your institutions, because you're going to have to be influencing these people. That's going to be very important to make sure that there's accountability, there's progress towards the RDM strategies you've set yourself, or you have set for your institution. So a very good understanding of RDM practices, a very good awareness is going to be key, as well as a very good awareness of your stakeholders. So what are they looking for? What's their aim? What their responsibilities should be when you want them to contribute to a working group, for instance. What roles they should play. and what your expectations are from them. So I would say if you can nail this down, you will definitely progress, making sure that obviously the objectives of the RDM practices are in alignment with your universities.
Okay, great. And we have some questions related to the roles played in resource development management services. The first one is, what role does IT staff play in implementation and effective research development management in academic libraries? IT staff.
Well, I guess, you know, not all libraries are IT experts. They will bound to overcome, or, you know, to actually meet the challenge around data. Again, we talked about data storage, we talk about data preservation. So I think IT would be able to advise on the best tools, on the best practice to use to actually store data, on what tools should be introduced, how this can be introduced, how much that would cost. They would possibly have also have to manage the relationship with the vendors, the suppliers of these platforms. They'll have the know-how to discuss with them. They'll know what the institution would expect, what they would require from these platforms. So they will be essentials in trying, maybe leading, at least co-managing the discussions with different vendors that will offer relevant platforms, and that will know the functionality of this platform, that will be able to help you towards the function, towards knowing how this works, and towards implementing as well really good guidance, really good tools around teaching staff on how to use this.
Okay, great. And in a situation where a university has a research office, what role would this research office play, and how can the library and the research office collaborate in establishing and implementing research development management services?
Okay. Well, if your university has a research office, blimey, do grab them. But I think, you know, the research office obviously should play a key role in implementing research data management practices. I think the research office would already have some sort of missions and objectives, which hopefully will get towards open science and research data management. So it's finding out what these objectives are, and then find some, you know, common grounds and common objectives between yourself as librarian and between the research office. I mean, research office, if unfortunately they don't have any missions in relation to research data management, I think again it will be up to you to change that and to try to really create awareness of research data management and how important data is to store, preserve, and making sure it is actually accessible, discoverable, and we can reuse it for disseminating and making the research of the institution more discoverable, which I'm sure is definitely a common ground, a common objective that you should have between the research office and the library yourself. But it's very much, you should be, you know, key partners towards establishing a policy, a working group that would help set this policy and the activities that will enable you to actually reach the objectives you've set in that policies.
Okay, great. And can research data management be used in school libraries as well?
I think so. I think, again, it's a matter of knowing what data, I guess, you know, your students, teachers use. I think it's it's looking at their behaviors towards studying, towards the research. It's looking at maybe what their needs would be in terms of accessing data, what kind of data they would like to access, etc. So it's really, it's creating that initially, that awareness around research data management, that actually there's research data out there that they can access for free. And also making them aware that their data sets as well are valuable, that the tools they use are valuable for sharing expertise, for the good of, for the advancement of research and teaching. I hope that answers the question.
All right, thanks. And somebody would like to know, when you talk about engagement by management of the institution, are the creators of data part of this engagement?
Yes, they should be. The data creators are the researchers, are really the ones that we need. So there's really the first people who are going to have to be educated towards making sure that the data is very well prepared, very well planned, so that it can be stored and deposited following compliance and following the policy the repository has, for instance. So data creators shouldn't be involved from the start, should be involved in the initial needs assessments as much as possible. And that their requirements should be met by the universities and the librarians. This probably is your core customer.
All right, great. And we have a question relating to licensing. What type of licensing terms is best suited for research data management?
So I would say CC by anything that, I mean, researchers should try to prepare the data in the way that they can open it as much as possible. So that any also tools that have been implementing to store, preserve data should be open. So should use a CC BY, license as much as possible. So really, is just to have open to make sure that there's a few restrictions as possible to be able to make that data discoverable, and to be able to make that data, so that researchers can reproduce and reuse that data.
Okay, great. And apart from DSpace, which is very popular, is there any other new software that you can share which can support research data management?
There are quite a few, and I think I've on that first webinar series on open science, there was actually a checklist of initiatives, and I think there's a list of software there that you can definitely use, but the one you've just noted is definitely the mostly used in Africa.
Okay, great. And in what way can open science data management support grant proposal and its acquisition scientifically? In what way can open science data management support grant proposal and its acquisition scientifically?
I think when the institution offers the means to store shared data sets, this will be obviously well regarded by funding agencies, for instance. I mean, funding agencies more and more require the outputs of the research that they funded, as well as the data sets, to be shared more widely. So to make sure that actually it's done properly, and to make sure that these requirements are addressed, the researchers that use that fund to carry out that research know about data management planning, know about data management tools, so have the right level of awareness, the right level of education to actually prepare the data right, so that it can be shared as per the request as per what the funders, the funding agencies have asked. Okay, so when actually, you know, suggesting grants or you know, putting together grant proposals, I think there should be a part on that, on data management, that will actually address and respond to the funder agencies or the government's needs, requirements towards opening data sets. That's really important. And there should be obviously clarity on the infrastructures to help, that will actually help, or the framework that will actually help the researcher to do that.
Okay, great. And one of our followers would like to find out if there is any rule or procedure for curation or preservation in research data management practices.
Yes, I mean, I don't know all the rules, but there are definitely some common standards that you know, all libraries should know about, and that should be applied. I'm particularly thinking about metadata. I'm thinking about the type of data you want to store, how long you want to store it. I'm thinking about the metadata around it. So what the metadata policy is going to be, how you're going to help the researchers to apply that policy, how that metadata policy will make the work more discoverable, etc. So there are very different aspects to elements, components to know about when actually preserving the data. But again, I invite you to talk to your peers in other institutions to really nail down what different components you should take into account for good preservation, curation of data.
Okay, great. And do you have any tips or places you can suggest where libraries can search for funding to establish research development management in academic libraries?
Look, I would say look for, I mean, very much depends on where you are in Africa. I think it's worth looking at, obviously, national governments, governments' policies. So these governments, to some extent, may encourage or should actually encourage the opening of data, and hopefully have fund available to institutions, libraries. I would also look at for, again, international partnerships. I think international partnerships can be one way of addressing the challenge of infrastructure, addressing the challenge of skills development, by knowing what you need. But maybe that doesn't actually cost that much, that actually quite a lot of software is free. There's not too much cost involved. But what you need is the know-how, is that sharing of expertise, that sharing of tips and best practice that you need to implement. Just a basic RDM practice, I think is really important. You know, partnerships with international institutions, particularly when researchers are now looking at to, you know, really partner with researchers from all over the world. It's incredible. It's great to see that, particularly during this pandemic, as we've seen. But I think really is looking out elsewhere beyond, and where you can establish strong links with these universities. I mean, CPUT, for instance, had established links with German institution and institution from Vietnam. Is that Vietnam, I believe? Hold on, I'll have to look for my notes, but it's definitely one from Asia and one from Europe.
Okay, great. And we did talk about research offices in academic institutions. Somebody would like to find out if this is a threat to the existing academic libraries, establishing research offices. Is it a threat to academic libraries?
No, I wouldn't think so at all. I would say it's actually an opportunity. it's an opportunity to extend everyone's knowledge. So extend knowledge of staff based in a research office and extend knowledge of staff based in the librarians, and actually how you can seek to work together to develop, with open science initiatives, to develop RDM practices, to develop guidance and framework. But this is, as librarian, you're a data curator. Your world is data, not research office. A research office world is not data purely as such. So as such, you are complementary. That's how I see things personally, and that's how I think you should see things, is you complement each other. And it's by starting working together that you'll be able to make a difference and really be able to start fulfilling the needs and requirements of researchers in your institutions or in your faculty.
Okay, great. And talking about timing, what could be the best timing in implementing research development management in an organization?
So in terms of timing, I would say I think you'd have to, you can start anytime, of course, but you can start, I think you'd have to think about when budgets have been agreed. And so what you should have ready by that time before to actually submit any requirements for budget or money for the year after. So what you need is a roadmap. And that roadmap should include elements, activities towards RDM practices, the cost of them, the resources of them, the risk involved, etc. And that should be prepared in advance of budget requirements, and to make sure that, again, all important key stakeholders are being involved and are aware of the resources that will be most probably needed when actually implementing these activities. I do believe you can start anytime, but again, it's having that awareness of budget timing.
Okay. All right, so I think we've done lots of justice to most of the questions that we have, and I do hope that the people that are listening in have been following. So before we wrap up, I'm going to invite Sibu. Sibu, you have a minute. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks, Velenasi. Okay, thank you very much, Velenasi. Just a word or two. Thank you very much to Valerie. From our open access department, or rather, first I have to introduce myself. My name is Sibu Zondi on behalf of Emerald Africa. We would like to really thank Valerie for creating the time to really speak on these three webinar topics. And also thanks to Dr. Nkem for inviting us to partner with AFLIA in sharing this type of content. Would like to also urge all the attendees that have been part of these webinars to get in touch with both AFLIA and ourselves if they want to find out more about our open access policies and also activities. Valerie is with that specific department. And also going forward, we are also offering other online sessions during these COVID times, such as authorship on both articles and books, as well as case studies. So we're grateful for this partnership with AFLIA, and we look forward to also partner in other relevant topics that the attendees would be interested to really hear about. And also a great attendance rate. I've been counting, I think today we had about over 217 participants, and previously saw about 216. So it's been a great series of webinars, and we're grateful for this partnership and also the pertinent questions that have been asked. Thank you so much for the moment, Velenasi.
Thank you so much. You try to keep your 1 minute plus though.
That's right.
All right. Okay, so thank you so much once again for Valerie for the wonderful presentation. It's been very engaging, and we've learned a lot. And a very big thank you to all of you that joined us today. It is our hope that the knowledge that we shared will help you improve your library work. Remember that all the webinar materials, including the slides and the recording, will be shared and made available to all participants in due course. Remember that this was a 3-part series, and certificate of attendance will be given to all attendees who were present throughout all the 3 webinars in the series, including this last one. So please take note that next week on Wednesday, which will be the 16th of September, we are going to have our next webinar, which will be looking at libraries, open science, and sustainable development. This will be at 12 hours noon GMT, and the webinar will be brought to you by AFLIA in partnership with the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals UK. So be sure to register for this one, because the webinar will broaden understanding of librarians on the roles they actually play when it comes to open science and how this drives sustainable development. Remember, if you are a librarian in Africa and your institution is not a member of AFLIA, kindly consider joining the team and send your emails to membership@aflia.net. So from me, Velenasi, and Valerie, our presenter today, and the entire team at AFLIA, it's goodbye and thank you for having joined in.